You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now present the Health Hub, hosted by Cathy Biase.
Welcome to the Health Hub on Radio Maria Canada, exploring cutting-edge health and wellness information and therapies, helping you to take your health to the next level. I'm your host, Cathy Biase, and I'm a holistic nutritionist and a professional cancer coach. On today's show, we are talking about reversing type 2 diabetes with my guest, Chris Reade. Chris is an entrepreneur, technologist, and author on a mission to change how we think about diabetes and food. After having a serious scare with diabetes, Chris refused to accept it as a life sentence. He took control, reversed it, and now shares his science-backed, practical approach in his new book, Beating Diabetes. Our conversation centers on breaking free from medications, mastering blood sugar control, and living healthier without extreme dieting. Great conversation on the way. Everybody stay tuned, and we'll be back in just a few minutes to start a conversation with Chris.
You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now continue with the program, The Health Hub, hosted by Cathy Biase.
Welcome back to the Health Hub. Please follow us on our social sites. We are on Instagram, X, and Facebook, and we are at the Health Hub RMC on those locations. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You've got a great story to tell us. You're going to debunk some myths that have been circulating around the diabetes disease for forever, I think, actually. But before we get to the finer points, tell us about your experiences and how this sort of landed you in this space of becoming an author and so knowledgeable on the topic.
Sure. So for me, the story begins with, which is kind of an odd way to begin, but it's the way life works out sometimes, with a screwed up insurance renewal. And in 2017 in the fall, my insurance agent screwed up. And I had to go through, in the same 10, 11-month period, I had to go through the standard battery of blood tests that you do for life insurance. Mm-hmm. And so when I did that the first time, my sugar was 100% normal. My A1C was normal. It was fine. When I did it the second time, my A1C, which is the measure of your average blood glucose over a month, went from, around 5.5 a year earlier, just about a year earlier, to 9.1, which is a big jump. And for me, when I started Googling that up, that's called rapid onset diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And the first answer you get when you look at that is pancreatic cancer. So it scared the hell out of me. And I went to a doctor. And like most guys my age, I hadn't been to a doctor in a long time. And I walk in, show her the blood test. She said, we'll start with the metformin. And then if that doesn't really get you where we need to, we'll hook you up with some insulin. And I was like, wait, what? And she said, look, this is a progressive incurable disease. You're going to have this the rest of your life. And I walked out of there in shock. And because, in a year, I'd gone from a totally normal person to now you're going to be taking drugs the rest of your life. And I was determined to find a better answer. And my book is about that answer, which is, at the end of the day, can be summed up very simply as soluble fiber can control and put into remission type 2 diabetes, kind of full stop.
Were you ever given any sort of a backstory as to why the sudden onset of the diabetes diagnosis? Was there ever an ask and answer about, are you on medication? Have you
Yeah,
changed your eat? Nothing.
I know. So the thing that's interesting about that is, yeah, you're totally right. Most people, and I think this is why I ended up searching for a different answer. For most folks, most people listening to this, uh, they get, Chris, your A1C is creeping up a little bit. You might want to cut back on sugar. Oh, you're a little bit overweight. You probably need to cut. Like that's the sort of cadence that most people get, which is one of the reasons so shocking to me is I play sports competitively for an adult, but competitively, in league play and stuff 3-4 days a week. I'm healthy generally. I don't take any drugs for blood pressure or any of that kind of stuff. And so I'd always been a really healthy person. And so I think that's why I went to so much trouble to figure out another answer, is because for me, it was such a shock. Most people get a lot of years where, it's a little high, it's a little higher, it's a little higher. And then they're like, yeah, you're now a type 2 diabetic, right? And so they get time to get used to it. And in my particular circumstance, it didn't work out that way. And I think that's what pushed me to find another way.
May I ask if you did go on medication as the initial knee jerk
Oh,
to
you
bring?
betcha. I sure
Yeah.
did. Yeah, and ultimately, I found that a little bit of berberine for
Hmm.
me has was just as good, if not better, than metformin. And it's not a prescription drug; it's just a supplement. So, I mean, it worked out really, really well for me. So, because the big thing I wanted, so I'm going on a trip in a couple of weeks, and like a vacation for a little while, and the big thing I didn't want to do was panic over not having my meds refilled or whatever. I
Hmm.
wanted to be able to just pick up and go on a trip for 2 weeks if I wanted to without having to think of medical complications and all this other kind of stuff. And that's what I got. That's what I was after, and that's what I got. And it took some work, took some education, takes a little bit of discipline, but not crazy amounts of discipline. Um, but that was the goal for me, was to not have anything in my life that would prevent me from just going and living my life the way I wanted to without really thinking about medicine or drugs.
So back to the education piece. Now you're
Sure.
an entrepreneur,
Yep.
a technologist. Did this shape your approach to learning about your diagnosis? And then really, how did you dive deeply into this? Like, where could you enlighten other people about their
Sure.
journey?
So the big thing for me, I first of all, that's a really great point. I've been self-employed basically my entire life, so my whole adult life since I was 24. Um, and I think that absolutely shaped why I was so singularly focused on it. A lot of my life, including now, in the age of AI, a lot of my life has been spent having to learn and relearn new things over and over and over again. And kind of a continuing, I don't know what's the term they've in vogue term right now. I think lifelong learner or whatever. I've always been that has been a part of, because I'm in the technology industry. That's a big part of my life, and I'm also a good researcher because of that. And so I dove into Google Scholar in a big way, and I started reading study after study after study after study, and they're all linked to and quoted in my book. I've got a whole chapter on it that I call "Studies I Bet My Life On." And the thing about that was, this is not new info. I didn't discover anything magical or particularly controversial in any way. People have been talking about in the scientific community about the power of soluble fiber to control blood sugar since the 70s. This is not like, oh my God, we just came up with this last year. People have refined it, and people have done longitudinal studies to show that it is accurate, but it is not new data. It took a while because, of course, there's hundreds of billions of dollars made in selling people diabetes stuff. And there's very little money to be made in selling people soluble fiber,
Hmm.
right? So it's not exactly something that's promoted a whole lot, which is why I wrote the book ultimately. Is a friend of mine had a similar experience where he had, in his case, he went up to 13 something. and his doctors want to put him in the hospital. And so he called me up and he's like, "Hey man, what did you do?" And I was like, "Well," and I started texting him back and I said, "Wait, I need to write this down in an email." And so the email was too long and I realized I needed to write a book. So
Well,
that's how I ended
there's
up
a
doing
giant
it.
leap.
Well, I realized
My
I was
email
like,
turned into a book.
well, because I didn't. The big thing for me, and I'm a science-based person. That's how I live my life. I believe in the scientific method and proving and disproving things and testing them yourself, which is why I focus so much on it. Because I don't want anyone to believe me because I'm clever or smart. I want them to believe me because there's good data.
Hmm.
And that to me was the most important part of the whole thing, was that I'm not asking anybody to take me on my word. There's 30, 40 years, 50 years of scientific evidence behind what I say. I'm just a person who happened to discover that stuff and put it into practice in a particularly maybe systemic way, because I'm a systemic person. I'm a technology person. So systems and how things run is kind of second nature to me. So I may have put it together in a maybe easier package to consume, but it's certainly not information I did, I came across it. I didn't discover it.
Well, I mean, you're probably the expert on answering the question I'm about to ask you is what is the biggest misunderstanding about type 2 diabetes?
I would say the first and largest and most important is something that not just the primary care physician I first saw, but everyone that you generally talk to, which is type 2 diabetes is progressive and incurable. And neither of those statements is necessarily accurate. There are off ramps. A lot of people nowadays, for example, a lot of people are taking the off ramp of Mounjaro or Ozempic.
Hmm.
That's just a very expensive drug regimen that you have to stick with forever. And if I'm going to stick with stuff forever, why go to all the why go to all the trouble?
Yeah.
I could have just taken some insulin and called it a day. And that's what I didn't want to do. But that's the biggest misconception is that there's like some magical tick box that says, "Bing, you're diabetic. You'll never not be a diabetic." That's just not true. Now, does it mean that there's work you got to do? Yeah. If you want to take drugs and you want to be non-type 2 diabetic, or you want to take your pre-diabetes down to non-diabetes, you can absolutely do it. It's in your hands. You can do it without drugs. And that is, to me, the biggest misunderstanding or inaccuracy.
You went through the medical pieces to sort of knock off what this could have been
I
caused by?
did. That's kind of
Okay.
a funny story, right? So, because I had my aunt, who I was very close to, had died at about the same age of pancreatic cancer, kind of came out of nowhere.
So a double
And
shock, kind of.
so I was like, whoa, oh my God, I was the same age. And I was like, oh boy. So I went and saw an internist, and I'm trying to remember the type of internist. Anyway, it's the people who deal with that kind of thing. And he says to me, I said, "Yeah, I want to do an MRI of my guts and make sure I don't have this." And he's like, "You know how unlikely that is?" I said, "Yeah, it's about 1 in 101. I don't want to be Mr. 101. So let's go take the MRI." He's like, "Okay." So I did, and I didn't have pancreatic cancer, which is why I'm talking to you now, because I'd definitely be dead if I did. Um, and especially at that age. But it did at least tell me, I don't know. So here's the interesting thing about type 2 diabetes, and this is something new that we've studied in the last, call it 4 or 5 years. We never used to know, and everybody will recognize this. There are people who run marathons and are skinny as all get out who get type 2 diabetes. And there are people who are 300 pounders and never get it. And we never understood what was it exactly that ticked that over. It turns out to be similar to cirrhosis of the liver. It's visceral fat. It's fat on your organs. And then everybody's body decides to deposit fat where it feels like it. It's just individual to each person. And all of us have that instance where, like, man, I always put on weight on the back of my arms or my butt or my belly, whatever. The same thing is going on in your internal systems. And it turns out that if you're just unlucky, your body will decide to deposit some fat on your pancreas and you will become type 2 diabetic. And that's why so many things happen when you lose weight. Some people, a lot of people, about 70, 80%, if they lose enough weight, 10% of their body weight on average, will suddenly stop being type 2 diabetic. And that's because what's happened is that fat has been removed from their internal organs. Other people, it never happens. They just struggle along. And that's where the soluble fiber stuff comes in, is it slows down the sugar absorption so much that it gives the function you have in your pancreas the opportunity to function and do its job. So even if you don't lose the fat off your pancreas, it still lets you function as if you're not a diabetic.
What about the connection of soluble fiber to the gut microbiome? Because
Oh
this
yeah,
too
big
is
deal.
becoming, it's involved in everything. So the microbiome, for many reasons, has been connected to sugar
Mhm.
spikes, sugar degradation. How can you explain to us the connection between type 2 diabetes and the health of the gut?
So, again, if your gut biome, some people are able to process certain different foods better. All of us have these things.
Hmm.
For me, for example, and it's actually funny that you mentioned this. I was thinking about it. I had Giardia a couple of years before, which is intestinal, what you call it, amoebic dysentery. And I got some bad food and traveling and got sick. And that really kind of nuked my gut biome because to get rid of it, they give you these very powerful drugs. Um, at any rate, your gut biome for each individual, like I didn't used to be able to eat tuna sushi, raw tuna. It would give me just the worst gas pains. After I had Giardia, I can eat tuna all the time, no problem. So there's some weird stuff that goes on, and sugar absorption is one of them. Some people's gut biome is just better at processing certain types of foods, and sugars are one of them. Um, and I think for each of us, that creates slightly different outcomes. So for some people, as an example, if you ate the amount of like beans and broccoli and stuff that I eat, it would give you gas pains. For me, it's no problem.
Hmm.
But there's lots of different soluble fibers. You don't have to go with beans. There's lots and lots of things. But my point is, I think you're absolutely right. There is a very direct connection between blood sugar, sugar absorption, and the gut biome. I'm just not enough of a scientist to know the answer.
So, what was your aha moment when you saw increased soluble fiber, decrease sugar spikes, and it actually happened for you?
Yeah. So in about just under 4 months, my A1C went down from that 9.1 to 6. And by the end of those 6 months, it was 5.1, something like that. My buddy Tim, who followed the same regime, he went from that 13 down to 4.9 in
Hmm.
4 months. Tim was even more hardcore than I was. He dropped 100 pounds too.
And is
Uh,
this cutting out a ton of foods?
it's cutting out added sugar for
Okay.
sure.
Yeah.
And then it is being very deliberate about white carbs, breads, potatoes, stuff like that. Um, it also meant for me, I used to love, love, love sugar in my coffee. It's weird because now, this is the thing about kicking sugar, right? If you kick sugar out of your life, within a few months, if somebody gives you something sugary, it actually doesn't
It's
taste good.
overpowering.
Yeah, and so now, like, if somebody accidentally, like, if I go to the coffee shop and instead of no sugar, they put sugar in my drink, I'm always like, oh, wow, too much for the. And But yeah, kicking sugar out of your life is obviously number one. That's a non-negotiable. I mean, that's
Hmm.
table stakes if you're trying to control diabetes when you've become either pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic. Sugar's just going to have to go. But that's not enough, really. Um, Sugar has to go, but then you really have to kind of rethink how you eat. You got to think about like, okay, if I want to kick the drugs out of my life, if I want to live healthier, because the other thing, and you mentioned it before about gut biome, when you start eating any version of the way that I prescribe in my book, any version of that that works for you is great. And I promise you, it will lower cholesterol. It will lower all of your numbers back towards the normals. For me, triglycerides are always a problem. Now, I mean, I haven't had a abnormal triglyceride test in golly, it's years and years. And I don't do anything. Like I never like I don't believe in diets. Like I'm against diets. Diets are bad. Um, this is not a diet. This is a way of approaching food. It's a different thing. A diet is the thing you go in, you're like, all right, I'm just going to do this one thing. I'm looking at it, and this is what I do on my Instagram a lot. I go to restaurants, I read the menu, and I show you like, here's the items on this menu. Boom, 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 boom. Here's soluble fiber, right? And I go to all different kinds of restaurants, sushi places, Mexican places, Italian, you name it. But unless you're at McDonald's, there's soluble food on every menu.
And so, what would you say, just before we head to break here, what would you say your daily fiber intake is, just so that as a comparison for the rest of us?
It works out to about somewhere between 12 and 16 grams a day of soluble fiber, somewhere in that neighborhood. It's not,
So I guess,
not a crazy amount.
When I'm working with people, I'll say I don't specify soluble fiber. I'll say try and get a total of 25 to 30 grams of fiber. Now you're focusing on soluble fiber.
Is critical, and the reason for that is so whole wheats and stuff like that are great for your gut biome. They're great for your system in general. They will not do squat for your sugar control. And the reason is just what soluble fiber is doing is making your gut work. And because it works, it gums up. That's the soluble part. It slows everything down. And because it slows it down, two things happen. One, sugar absorption slows down. So anything that had sugar in it is also going to slow down, which is why it doesn't spike your blood sugar. And so the diabetic part goes away. The second thing it does, which is just as important, is you feel full. I mean, if you start, like, let's take a sushi restaurant. Let's really go to lunch. Like if I leave here and I go to lunch and eat sushi, right? And I start with a big old bowl of edamame. If you get a big old bowl of edamame at the beginning of your sushi meal, you know what you're not ordering? An extra roll. Mm-hmm. And you're definitely not ordering mochi because you're full. And if you're full, you don't feel like ordering that stuff. So that's the kind of self-reinforcing part of this that's helpful. But I love fiber, but you got to be, in my thing, for sugar control, it's soluble that's so key.
So insoluble fiber kind of sweeps everything out, and the soluble fiber kind of bulks.
Yep, exactly.
Basically is the difference. And then what are the key foods that you have implemented into your diet to increase the soluble fiber piece?
Sure. So for me, breakfast, some version of oatmeal, and we make this, and it's the recipes in the book, this awesome, delicious oatmeal casserole. And it's great because for me, remember, I'm a computer person, and in my industry, we say ease of use equals use. And so that's what I try to do is get easy foods that are constantly available. For lunch, I'll do a lot of different things. I have chickpeas, I'll have broccoli, I'll have Brussels sprouts, all that kind of stuff, along with some other fun foods, usually a protein or something. And then dinner could be anything. I mean, it covers the gamut. I'll have last night. What did we have last night? Last night we had this awesome steak, green beans, and Brussels sprouts dish that my wife makes. That's delicious. And I had that for dinner last night. So that's pretty typical. It's more just making sure that soluble fiber is present at every meal.
And easy to do if you're spanning it out in 3 separate meals, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, there's no point where I'm like, and also it wouldn't help you. If you just bulked up on 16 grams of soluble fiber in one meal, and then you had French fries the next 2 meals, your blood sugar is going to spike. Mm-hmm. So it's more just having kind of a steady diet. That's what I'm saying. It's an approach to food, not really a diet.
Perfect. Okay, let's take a break, everybody. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
You are listening to The Health Hub here on Radio Maria Canada, a Catholic voice wherever you are. To contact us and be a part of the show, email thh@radiomaria.ca. We now continue with the program. Here once again is your host, Cathy Biase.
Welcome back to the Health Hub. We are talking with Chris Reade, and we're going to continue on this fascinating, fantastic path of trying to debunk some of the myths, trying to educate you about type 2 diabetes. This is not something that is uncommon these days, type 2 diabetes. And, Chris, pretty much as with many diseases, many conditions, you can take a pill to quickly get rid of the symptomology, but it's not
Sure.
taking care of the underlying issues here. And you said something through the first part of the show that we all have something, and we do all have something. I think. Anyways, I've never met that perfect person. And so we have to manage things according to our own internals. But before we get into sort of that idea, I just wanted to throw that out there. I just want to make a connection between carbohydrates and fiber, soluble and insoluble fiber, because, maybe I was remiss in assuming that everyone would understand that you get your fiber from carbohydrates. So, how do you approach this conversation with people?
So I have a really good friend of mine who solved this same problem a very, very different way. He went the whole carnivore thing and paleo and eats nothing but protein. I have a lot of respect for that. I don't have that kind of discipline, and so the system I did had to have something that people with low self-control numbers could do. But the ultimately speaking, you could say that what I talk about in my book is a very high carbohydrate kind of a solution. It's just choosing your carbohydrates differently to get you the fiber that you want to help control your sugar dealings, and that's the thing. So, for example, you can look at a baked potato. When you look at a baked potato, you see a yummy chunk of carbs, hopefully smothered in butter and sour cream and all sorts of other goodies. I see a giant source of sugar. You can then, on the other hand, look at a bowl of hummus and whole wheat pita. Also, nothing but carbs, carbs with carbs. That, on the other hand, though, is a balanced deal where the soluble fiber in the hummus is going to offset any whole wheat flour stuff that's going to turn into sugar, which is relatively minimal in whole wheat, but still there in the thing. So one of them is balanced and one of them isn't. They're both carbohydrates, though. And so I think that's the difference is all carbs are not carbs from a sugar standpoint for sure.
But you can use certain things, say on your baked potato. Do you ever talk about using certain things that can help offset that sugar spike, like what you're eating the potato with, or what you throw on your potato? Like, say you throw on a couple of tablespoons of hemp.
So the big thing I do, so if I'm going to go, so I happen to love me some baked potato. Um, I'm Irish and German. I'm doomed to love potatoes. And so anyway, if I was going to go and there's a very, very popular hamburger spot here that serves burgers and then baked potatoes. So if I'm going to eat there, I'm going to skip the buns on the burger and then I'm going to have that baked potato. But before I do, I'm going to order a big old side. They have these fantastic green beans. I'm going to eat the whole darn thing of green beans first. And then I'm going to have the baked potato. Because what's going to happen there is the soluble fiber in the green beans is going to slow down the sugar absorption, and I'm going to get to enjoy my baked potato. And that's kind of the way, that kind of balanced, start with the soluble fiber and then go with stuff that's either neutral or might have to turn into sugar. It doesn't have to be added sugar necessarily. I certainly wouldn't do that. But that's where it's a game, it's a system, if you want to think about it that way. But it's a way to live like a normal person, because as much as I love my buddy and he enjoys the hell out of steak and fish and all of those things, I wanted to just be able to walk into any restaurant and not have to worry that there wouldn't be something I could eat on their menu.
There are so many different pathways to sugar, sugar spikes, cortisol, things like that, So there is a balance. And I think what you're showing, and even in comparison with your buddy, depending on where you come from, depending on the underlying reasons for what's going on, different approaches will have to be made for you individualistically. And I think that this is the biggest understanding that we have to come to when it's managing our health. We get a book like yours and we can take ideas. It's not a particular one pathway roadmap, but it's ideas to help manage. And I think this is where we need to be going. Your friend who lost his blood sugar dropped drastically on protein, perhaps that's how his body works. Perhaps he came from a different spot. You don't know.
And also, there are, as you said, there is a lot of paths that you can follow. I think the most important thing about that, and it's in the forward to my book that a friend of mine, Eric, wrote, and he's a personal trainer and a weightlifting champion. And he said, and this, I think, the best line in the whole forward, uh, everyone is going to be obsessed with their health at some point. The question is it before or after your diagnosis? And that's true.
Hmm.
Everybody sooner or later, either on your deathbed or before, is going to start worrying about their health. And the question is, are you going to wait till something bad happens, or you take control when people are like, well, Chris, you could really lose a couple of pounds, and you might want to cut back on sugar because your A1C is kind of creeping up a little bit. When you start hearing that kind of stuff, that's the moment
Hmm.
um, to take control. And that's where, like I said, in my case, it blindsided me. And that's one of the reasons that I took so much action. But for most people, it's kind of a creeping, like it's like a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. And I would say to anyone, it's like having children. There's no moment where you're going to be like, yes, now's the great time. Everything's right in our lives. Let's have babies, right? It doesn't work that way. There's no great moment to take control of your health. There's only the moment that you do it.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
all of
And
us
as
have
we
that.
age, certain things, the thyroid we haven't talked about. The
Oh, yeah.
thyroid can be, as we age, the thyroid slows down and metabolism slows down, and hand in hand will be the metabolism of sugars. So a whole bunch of different things. And that's why I think it's important that we look at all different angles. One path doesn't work, you try something else. Now, do you have certain lifestyle habits that you have paired with
Oh, yeah.
diet that
Yep.
can also aid in controlling blood sugar?
So there's some really great ones. I will say one of the big ones, and it's just, you'll hear it over and over again from a lot of different people. Getting a decent night's sleep,
Mhm.
dealing with the stresses in your life instead of bottling them up, all of these things affect your blood sugar. Um, the other thing, and just this is a great hack that it was very recent research from last year that is amazing to me, but I've checked it, and it's been replicated many times. Um, if you have a meal and then immediately after that meal, you get up and do as little as 5 minutes of exercise. And I don't mean like get up and do jumping jacks, like walk down the block or walk around the block, like 5 minutes or less. I think they said 2 minutes in the first study. But anyway, the point is, you will lower your blood sugar uptake by 25% just from getting up and walking around the block. So what I did, and like I said, I'm a systems person. So what I did was I said, okay, well, I have two dogs. I have to walk them anyway. So instead of walking them at the end of the night, a couple hours later, I walk them right after dinner now. So we finish dinner, throw dishes in the sink, and walk the dogs out the door. Just walk around the block. That's it. Knocks 25% of my blood sugar down for nothing. I didn't
Mhm.
do anything. I did a thing I was going to do anyway. And I have a whole section in my book about habit stacking and temptation bundling, which are two mechanisms that you can use. Because discipline, you're never going to hear me say, you just got to have discipline. You just have to focus. I don't believe that. I don't think anybody, even if they're a high discipline person, can keep going forever. But you can keep going forever if instead you construct a life that supports and enforces those things on you. So,
Mhm.
like I said, I took the study that somebody did that said 25% of my blood sugar lowered just by taking a walk, and I did what every healthy society in the world does. If you notice, so if like if you go to Italy, what do they do after dinner? They get up and walk around. That's what
Yep.
they do. And you see that in society after society that has low numbers of diabetes, you start seeing all of these habits that when they stick to these old habits, it really works. But by doing it paired with something I was going to do anyway, I got to walk the dog. I have a dog, I have to walk the dog. By moving it from the end of the night to after dinner, I save myself an enormous amount of blood sugar uptake that I don't have without changing anything. I'm still going to do that. So there's a lot of stuff I try to do about that that help control the whole thing.
You have to create a life that you're going to enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's all about
Absolutely.
restraint, you're not having any fun, and then you're increasing your stress on the other side of it. It's all about balance. I'm a firm, firm believer. How long did it take for you to turn things around, would you say?
4 or 5 months, something like that.
So not long.
No, it wasn't a big. I mean, by month four, like I said, I knocked it down from 9 to 6, my A1C, and I do home tests. Um, I've also done every year I do regular blood tests a couple times too, but the home tests are generally, if anything, they're going to be a little higher. And that gave me good baselines because that's the other thing I like. I don't really like the continuous glucose monitor things. Dexcoms and stuff like that.
Hmm.
I think they
They're
give you too
stressful.
much data,
Hmm.
and too much data is worse than none. Because too much data starts, there's so much noise. Everybody, you could be the healthiest person, you'd be 20 years old and an athlete, and your blood sugar is still going to be going up and down like a yo-yo all day. It's just part of human body. Your systems don't regulate perfectly. And so the Dexcoms, I feel like they give you too much data, and you start making human beings are really bad about drawing conclusions off of incomplete data. We're really bad at that as a species, and so I think the Dexcoms get you jump at shadows and making stuff up like, oh yeah, this happened, and then my blood sugar is, like it's just you start inventing these little chimeras that you follow around, and they're not real. That's why
Hmm.
A1C, every doctor will still really just follow your A1C. That's what they
Hmm.
really care about.
Now, does label reading come into play when you're shopping?
Absolutely. You betcha. And that's a whole chapter in my book uh, about label reading because it's super easy. Like when you're going for soluble fiber stuff, there's like 2 lines in the label. That's it. It's like the easiest thing in the world. How much added sugar, how much soluble fiber. That's really it. And I'm looking for foods that have either a balance, 1 for 1, or preferably a higher soluble fiber number and a lower sugar number. But that's really it. And then I give some really good examples because a lot of things that you're going to see in the quote health food sections of a grocery store are not particularly healthy, at least from a sugar standpoint. They may be healthy from other standpoints, but from a sugar control standpoint, a lot of them are less healthy than you'd really think they are.
What has been the response to your book?
So most people have really when I've gotten to talk to readers, the thing that they have said that is the most useful is that it's practical.
Hmm.
This is a thing that anybody can do, and it's not something you got to be like, oh, I'm too far gone or whatever. I mean, you could be 10 years diabetic and still reverse it. I mean, and certainly people really didn't believe that much until like Ozempic and Mounjaro came along. And people were like, oh my God, look at this. I'm like, well, stop taking it for a while and you'll be right
Yeah,
back.
exactly.
But hopefully you can take that to knock it down and then, switch your diet around. The problem, of course, with those drugs, and this is the problem with any easy solution, right? Is it's too easy. You do it and then you're like, well, I don't have to change anything else in my life. You're like, well, is that really solving your problem?
Hmm.
Or is that just taking a temporary measure that costs a lot of money and means you wedded to a drug forever? Um, so that it just depends. For me, freedom was important.
Yeah, I agree with that. Um, did you do a complete pantry overhaul, or was it that excessive for you?
No, I mean, we absolutely, and I will say having a life partner who's on board with those changes is obviously a big deal.
Hmm.
Um,
Especially if the life partner's cooking for you.
Yeah, well, and we both do that, but it's more that if she wasn't, we've been married a very long time. If we weren't on the same page about wanting to be healthy, that could be tough. My mom and dad were like that. My mom was more into healthy food, and my dad was like, he was a type 2 diabetic, and I will say, he was intellectually honest about it. He was like, I don't care. I want the Oreos and I want the Pepsi, and if you got to shoot me up with some more insulin, that's fine. Go for it. Um, Not my way of going about the world, but definitely a way. um, but anyway, no, not a whole pantry overhaul, but I will say, and this is why there's recipes in my book. There is a consistent cadence of recipes because ease of use equals use. And so if I go into my house for lunch right now, there's a chickpea and feta and tomato dish that we have that's in the book that is a constant staple in our lives. It's freaking delicious and it's just sitting there. It's the easiest possible thing I could eat for lunch. There's nothing in our house that I could eat that's easier than that. 30 seconds in the microwave and I'm ready to go. And it lasts all week. And so that sort of pantry, I would say that's strategic, that's systems.
Hmm.
is more important than a pantry overhaul. The pantry overhaul, like, is there pasta in my pantry? You betcha. Is there lots of sugary foods in my pantry? There sure are. Am I tempted by them anymore? Honestly, really not.
Yeah, change takes time.
It does.
It's that's part of the process. You can't expect to be perfect at the outset, but you take steps, one
And
step
look, I
every
just
day.
finished Mardi Gras, right? I mean, I live in New Orleans, and Mardi Gras season was just here. I just put it on my Instagram. Everywhere I went for like 6 days straight, anybody's house I went to, there's king cake like right there, and all delicious versions of it, different kinds, and all this stuff, and all these sugary treats. And did I fall off the wagon a little bit sometimes? Yeah, I did. Absolutely. But this is the other thing that I think is really important. You just touched on it. Forgiveness. You're not going to be perfect. You're a human being. You're going to screw stuff up. That's why the system is more important, because the system will reinforce you. And the big thing that I can say to people about that is, when you do give in to temptation, when you do screw up, the answer isn't to say, well, that's it. Screw that. I'm just going to go all hog wild, right? The answer is to say, all right, I screwed that up. I'm going to get back now. And that's really important from a sticking to things standpoint, is not saying I screwed up, therefore I am a screw up. It's I screwed up, but I'm going to get better next time.
100%. I think if you develop habits, it doesn't matter if you fall off a little bit every once in a while. You're going back to habits that you're cultivating. Where can people find your book?
So it's electronic and physical versions. The website is beatingdiabetes.us, and that's got links to buy on BNN, Amazon, etc., direct from the publishing house I work with, as well as links to ebooks, and of course my Instagram and Facebook profiles.
And you want to give us those links for Instagram and Facebook?
That's Beating Diabetes US, and the same for Facebook.
Wonderful.
So Beating Diabetes US everywhere.
Chris, it's been enlightening. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your story and giving us great insights.
Thanks so much for having me, Cathy.
Everybody, we'll talk to you next week on The Health Hub.
You have been listening to The Health Hub, hosted by Cathy Biase, here on Radio Maria Canada.